Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up watching my parents work themselves to the bone just to keep food on the table. My father was a tricycle driver, my mother sold vegetables at the market. Money was always tight. When I told them I wanted to go to college, they didn't hesitate. They said they'd make it work, no matter what. So I studied BS Marine Transportation. It wasn't easy. I worked part-time at a convenience store during the school year and took on loading jobs at the docks during breaks. There were nights I'd study until 3 a.m., then wake up at 5 to help my mother prep her vegetables before class. But I kept going because I knew this degree was my ticket to giving my family a better life. 4 years later, I did it. I graduated. First person in my entire family to finish college. My parents threw a small party at our house, nothing fancy, just some relatives and neighbors. My mother cooked her special pancit and lumpia. My father borrowed extra plastic chairs from the neighbors. They were so proud. They couldn't stop smiling. About an hour into the party, my aunt came up to me. She's my mother's older sister, always been the type to compare everything. When her kids were younger, she'd brag about their grades. When they got jobs at the mall, she made sure everyone knew they worked at what she called prestigious establishments. Never mind that one was a cashier and the other worked at a fast food chain. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs, but she acted like they were executives. My aunt congratulated me, then asked when I could get her family a free cruise now that I was basically a sailor. I laughed. I genuinely thought she was making a joke. I told her that was a good one, but she said she was being serious. She went on about how my mother had been bragging to everyone about my big career, so the least I could do was share the benefits with family. I stopped laughing. She had this expectant look on her face like she was waiting for me to pull out cruise tickets right there. I explained that I was going to be working on a cargo vessel. There were no cruises, no passengers, just containers. She told me not to be selfish. She said she knew how these things worked, that people like me get perks, free trips, discounts, family passes. I repeated that it wasn't how it worked. I'd be out at sea for 6 months straight. We transport goods, not people. There's no casino, no buffet, no swimming pool. She asked if 6 months meant I'd have plenty of time to arrange something then. I tried to stay calm. I explained again that I'd be working on a cargo ship in the middle of the ocean, carrying containers from one port to another. There was literally no way for her to come aboard, even if I wanted to bring her. My aunt crossed her arms and her face got red. She told me she'd already told her kids to start packing, that they were so excited. She asked if I was really going to disappoint them. I said I never promised anyone anything, that she'd assumed something that wasn't even possible. She argued that my mother said I'd be traveling the world, that it was basically a cruise. I told her I'd be working in the engine room or on deck, maintaining equipment, standing watch. It was a job, not a vacation. She said it was ridiculous. She asked what the point was of having family in the industry if they couldn't even enjoy it. I said the point was that I'd be earning money to help my parents and build a future. That was it. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire bloodline. Her voice got louder. She went on about how, after everything my mother did for me, this was how I was repaying them. By being stingy. People were starting to stare. My mother came over, trying to smooth things over. My mother asked what was wrong. My aunt complained that I was refusing to get them a cruise. She brought up all the times she'd helped my mother when we had nothing. My mother looked confused. She asked what cruise my aunt was talking about, saying I was going to work on a cargo ship. My aunt insisted that exactly, ships, and that I could get them on one. My mother explained that those ships don't take passengers. They carry containers. My aunt said she didn't believe it. She accused us of always finding excuses when family asked for help. She said the first chance we got to move up in the world, suddenly we were too good for the rest of them. I'd had enough. I told her I wasn't too good for anyone. I was just telling her the reality of my job. If she didn't want to believe me, that was her problem. But I wasn't going to apologize for not giving her something that didn't exist. She said not to talk to her like that she was my elder. I told her then to act like one and stop demanding things that made no sense. She gasped like I'd slapped her. She grabbed her purse and called to her kids. She announced loudly that they were leaving, that she wouldn't stay where they weren't appreciated. Her kids looked confused. They'd been eating happily in the corner. She dragged them out the door, making a whole scene. A few relatives tried to stop her, but she just kept going, yelling about how disrespectful young people are these days. The party got quiet for a minute. Then my father started laughing. Actually laughing. Soon, a few others joined in. Someone made a joke about how my aunt probably thought I was going to captain the Titanic or something. That was 3 weeks ago. My aunt hasn't spoken to me since. She blocked me on social media. Apparently, she's been telling other relatives that I'm arrogant and selfish now that I'm successful. Some of them believe her. Most don't care. I start my cadetship in 2 days. 6 months on a container vessel sailing between Asia and the Middle East. No tourists, no family packages. Just me, the crew, and thousands of metal boxes. I'm perfectly fine with her silence. If she can't understand the difference between a cargo ship and a cruise liner, that's on her. I've got more important things to worry about, like actually starting my career and making my parents proud. And maybe, just maybe, saving up enough so that one day I can actually take my parents on a real vacation. Not my aunt, though. She can book her own cruise. For over 30 years I've been living in Charleston, and I thought I knew my family pretty well. It turns out, you can still be surprised by people you've known their whole lives. My son is 20 now, a sophomore at the University of South Carolina. Good kid, smart, works hard at his classes. Last year during his freshman year he started dating this wonderful girl he met on campus. Her name is Monique, and from the moment we met her, my wife and I just adored her. She is polite, funny, has this infectious laugh that fills up a room. She is studying pre-med, wants to be a pediatrician. My wife always says she has this warmth about her that makes you feel comfortable right away. Now Monique is black and we are white, but that has never been an issue for us. Never even crossed my mind that it would be an issue for anyone in our family either. I guess I was naive about that. Last week my wife and I decided to throw a party at our house. Nothing too fancy, just family and some close friends. Burgers on the grill, some drinks, people hanging out in the yard. My son and Monique made the drive down from Columbia to attend, which was great because we don't get to see them often during the semester. The party was going smoothly, people were eating, chatting, having a good time. I was making my rounds, making sure everyone had what they needed, when I noticed my son and Monique had disappeared from the main group. I found them around the side of the house away from everyone else. Monique was crying and my son had his arm around her, looking absolutely furious. My stomach dropped. I asked them what was wrong and what had happened. My son looked at me with his jaw tight and told me to ask my nephew what he had said to her. Monique was wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself. I could see she was embarrassed about crying in front of me. I asked Monique what happened, calling her honey. She looked down at her hands and said it was okay, that she didn't want to cause problems. My son cut in and said it wasn't okay, telling her to explain what happened. She took a shaky breath and told me that my nephew had found them talking by themselves. She explained that he had told my son he shouldn't be slumming it with someone like her. Then she said he had called her ghetto and used other names she didn't want to repeat. She said he had made some really ugly comments about black people in general. I felt my blood pressure spike. I'm not usually an angry person, but hearing this made my hand shake. I asked where my nephew was. My son started to say he was about to handle it himself, but I cut him off and asked again where the kid was. My son pointed back toward the house. I told them both to stay there and that I would deal with it. I walked back through the yard, scanning the crowd until I spotted my nephew standing near the food table with a plate in his hand, laughing about something with one of his friends. He is 17, old enough to know better than the garbage that apparently just came out of his mouth. I told him we needed to talk right now. He looked up surprised and asked what was up. I told him not to play dumb and asked what he had said to Monique. He looked around, noticed people were starting to look at us. He claimed he didn't know what I was talking about. I asked him directly if he didn't tell my son he was slumming it, and if he didn't call his girlfriend disgusting names. His face changed. He realized he was caught. He started to say that he was just looking out for his cousin, that someone needed to tell him something. I cut him off and asked if he thought he was looking out for my son by being a racist piece of garbage to his girlfriend. He got defensive and said he wasn't racist, that he just thought my son could do better than someone like her. I told him to stop talking and I said I wanted him to leave right now. He asked if I was really kicking him out over this. I said yes and told him to get his things and go. He just stood there staring at me like I had slapped him. His mother, my sister-in-law, came rushing over and asked what was going on. I told her that her son had just verbally attacked Monique with some disgusting racist comments, and that I had asked him to leave. She said her son wouldn't do that. My nephew started to say he was just being honest about something, but I interrupted and said I didn't care. I told him he wasn't welcome here anymore and to leave. My brother came over then trying to play peacemaker. He said his son was just a kid and asked if we couldn't talk about this. I said there was nothing to talk about. I explained that my nephew had disrespected a guest in my home and hurt someone my son cared about. I told them I wanted all of them to leave. My sister-in-law said I was being ridiculous, that boys say stupid things sometimes. I said not in my house they don't, and told them to get out. The three of them left, my sister-in-law shooting daggers at me with her eyes the whole way. I could hear murmuring from the other guests, but I didn't care. I went back to find my son and Monique. I told them that my brother's family was gone and that I was sorry about what happened. Monique said I didn't have to kick them out. I told her yes, I did. I explained that she was family now and nobody got to treat her like that, especially not in my home. She started crying again, but this time she gave me a hug and thanked me. The party continued after that, though the mood had definitely shifted. But my son and Monique stayed, and by the end of the night, Monique was laughing again with my wife in the kitchen. Since then, my brother and sister-in-law have been calling me non-stop saying I blew everything out of proportion, that I embarrassed them in front of everyone, that their son was just being honest and I should have handled it privately. My brother even said I owed them an apology for making a scene. I haven't responded to any of it. They can stay mad for all I care. I'm a single dad raising my 8-year-old daughter. Money's tight since the divorce, and I work 2 jobs to make ends meet. My weekday job is at a warehouse, and on weekends I drive for a rideshare company. That Saturday, I had exactly 30 minutes between dropping off my last passenger and picking up my daughter from her soccer practice. I needed to grab groceries fast because we were out of everything, and I promised her we'd make homemade pizza that night. The supermarket parking lot was packed, which wasn't unusual for a Saturday afternoon. I'd been circling for about 5 minutes when I finally spotted a car pulling out of a space near the entrance. Perfect! I put on my turn signal and waited for the car to back out completely. I've learned to be patient about these things. Rush and you cause problems. Just as the spot cleared and I started pulling in, this car came screaming around the corner from the opposite direction and nearly clipped my front bumper. I slammed on my brakes. The car stopped at an angle, blocking my path into the space. I rolled down my window and told her I'd been waiting for the spot. The woman behind the wheel glared at me. She had that look, you know, the one that says the rules don't apply to her. She snapped back that she didn't see my name on it. I explained that I had my signal on and was clearly waiting, and that she'd come from the wrong direction. She just said it was first come, first served, and told me to move my car. I looked at my dashboard clock. 23 minutes left. I didn't have time for this. I called her ma'am and asked her to please back up so I could park. That's when she put her car in park and got out. I noticed 2 little kids in the back seat couldn't have been older than 5 and 7. They looked uncomfortable. She started yelling about how I thought I could just take whatever I wanted, and that this was her spot because she saw it first. I pointed out that she was nowhere near here when I started waiting and suggested she find another space. She got even more worked up, demanding to know if I knew who she was. She announced that her husband was a lawyer, like that was supposed to scare me. I told her good for him, but I still got here first. She stepped closer to my car and that's when I noticed A guy sitting in a sedan parked right next to the disputed spot. He had his phone up and was clearly recording everything. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me this little nod like he was getting all of it. The woman went on a rant about millennials thinking they were entitled to everything. She said she had children in her car and needed the spot more than me. I responded that I also had a child I needed to pick up and asked her again to move her vehicle. She said she wasn't going anywhere. She walked back toward her car and I thought maybe she was finally going to leave. Instead, she opened her door, reached inside and pulled something out. When she turned back around, my blood went cold. She had a gun. She didn't point it at me directly, but she held it down at her side in clear view, lifting it just enough so I could see it. It was a deliberate move, a threat. She said maybe I should be the one finding another spot. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. This woman was threatening me with a firearm over a parking space while her two young children watched from the back seat. The kids looked terrified. I asked her if she was seriously pulling a gun on me right now. She said she was just showing me she meant business, then told me to move. She tucked the gun back into her waistband, got back in her car, and waited. I carefully backed my car up and moved to a spot 3 rows back. My hands were shaking. She immediately pulled into the space, got her kids out, and walked into the store like nothing had happened. I sat there for a minute trying to process what just occurred. Then I remembered the guy with the phone. I got out and walked over to his car. He rolled down his window. I told him I knew it was random but asked if he'd caught that on video. He said he'd gotten every second of it, and that the woman was insane. I asked if he'd be willing to show the footage to the police if I called them. He said absolutely, and that he'd been planning to suggest the same thing. He pointed out that what she did was brandishing a weapon, and she had kids in the car. He agreed it wasn't okay. I pulled out my phone and dialed the emergency number. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation. She threatened me with a gun. Yes, over a parking spot. Yes, she has 2 young children with her. Yes, there's video evidence. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. They arrived in less than 10 minutes. 2 patrol cars pulled into the lot. I met them near the entrance and explained everything again. The guy with the video introduced himself and showed the officers his footage. You could see everything clearly. Her pulling out the gun, holding it where I could see it. The whole threatening gesture. One officer went into the store while the other took our statements. About 15 minutes later, they walked her out in handcuffs. She was screaming about how this was ridiculous and that she was going to sue everyone. She yelled that this was harassment and that she didn't do anything wrong, claiming we were all lying. The officer told her they had video evidence and that she brandished a firearm in a threatening manner. He told her she was under arrest. Her kids were crying. Another officer had called Child Protective Services, and a social worker arrived shortly after to take custody of the children temporarily. When they put her in the police car, she was still yelling. She said we'd all regret this, and that her husband would have everyone's badges. She claimed she knew the mayor. The officer taking my statement shook his head and said they got at least one of these a month. He explained that people think they can intimidate others with weapons and face no repercussions. He thanked me for calling it in and thanked the other witness for the video evidence, saying it was a clear case. I gave them my contact information in case they needed anything else for the prosecution. The whole thing had taken over an hour. I'd missed my daughter's pickup time, but I'd called my ex-wife to explain, and she'd grabbed our daughter from practice. She'd spend at least a night in jail, and depending on her record, possibly much longer. All over a parking spot. I moved in with a roommate years ago after we met through a mutual friend. When I mentioned I was looking for someone to split costs on a 2-bedroom apartment, she seemed excited about the opportunity. Everything seemed perfect at first. Her parents lived about 20 minutes away, which she said was close enough to visit but far enough to have independence. The first few months were actually great. We'd watch movies together, cook dinner, and split groceries evenly. Her parents would invite us over for Sunday dinner sometimes, and they were genuinely nice people. Her mom would always send us home with leftovers, and her dad would crack jokes about how we were probably living off ramen. If only they knew what was coming. Things started getting weird around month 4. She came home one day and seemed off. When I asked if everything was okay at work, she just brushed me off and said she was fine, just tired. I didn't push it. A week later, rent was due. We always paid on the first of the month, splitting it down the middle. I transferred my half to our landlord like always and waited for her to do the same. The third came and went. Then the fifth, I asked her if she'd sent her half of the rent yet, mentioning that the landlord usually got annoyed if we were late. She said she'd do it that night and that she just forgot. She didn't do it that night, or the next night. By day 10, our landlord called me, directly asking why he'd only received half the rent and wanting to know what was going on. I told him I'd talk to my roommate and figure it out. I confronted her that evening, trying to stay calm. I told her the landlord had called and asked what was happening. She said she was just having some cash flow issues right now and would get the money to me soon. I asked her what she meant by soon, pointing out that rent was due 10 days ago. She got snappy and told me she'd handle it. She got defensive, which immediately put me on edge. But I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really was having financial problems. I covered her portion that month, thinking she'd pay me back. She didn't. Month 5 rolled around. Same story. Excuses, promises, nothing. This time it wasn't just rent. The utilities were in my name and she hadn't paid her half of those either. I was hemorrhaging money covering for her while she went out for drinks with co-workers and came home with new clothes. I told her we needed to talk about money. I pointed out that she owed me for 2 months of rent now, plus utilities, which added up to over $2,000. She said she knew and that things had just been really tight, promising she'd pay me back. I asked her when, demanding a specific date. She said she didn't know and told me to stop pressuring her. That's when I knew I needed out. I told her I wouldn't be renewing our lease when it ended in 2 months. She seemed almost relieved, which should have been my first warning sign. Those last 2 months were tense. We barely spoke. I spent most of my time in my room or out with friends. When moving day finally came, I helped her pack her stuff into her dad's truck. Her parents were there, friendly as always. Her mom said she was glad we girls had this experience together and mentioned it was too bad we were going our separate ways. I just smiled and nodded, not wanting to cause drama. A week after she moved out, I got a call from her niece. She was 19 and apparently had no filter. She told me she'd heard what her aunt did to me, referring to the rent situation. I asked her how she knew about that. She explained that her aunt had done this before, pulling the same stunt with 2 other roommates. Her parents had told her to stop bailing her out, so she moved on to screwing over friends instead. Then the niece dropped the real bomb. She said she thought I should know that her aunt had been telling people I was the reason she moved out. I asked what she meant. The niece explained that her aunt told her grandparents I had guys over constantly, like different men all the time, and that she felt uncomfortable. She claimed I was inappropriate and she had to leave for her own safety or whatever. I was furious. Not only had she stolen from me, but now she was trashing my reputation to cover her tracks. Her parents thought I was some kind of mess while their daughter was the victim. No way. I sat down and wrote everything out. Every missed payment, every excuse, every lie. I explained that I had covered her rent twice, that she owed me money she never intended to pay back, and that her story about why she moved out was completely fabricated. I printed it, put it in an envelope, and drove to her parents' house. Here's where I got a little strategic. I didn't seal the envelope. I knew her mom collected the mail every afternoon like clockwork. I knew she was the type to notice an unsealed envelope and peek inside. I was counting on it. I dropped it in their mailbox around noon and went home. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was her mom. She apologized repeatedly and said she had no idea what her daughter had done. She explained that her daughter had told them I was the problem, and they believed her. She said she'd opened my letter and was horrified by what she read. I told her I appreciated that and just wanted her to know the truth. She said they were going to handle this and that they'd make sure I got my money back. I did eventually get paid back, though it took months and came in small installments from her parents, not her. From what I heard, she got pregnant about a year later. Last I checked, she still lives in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house. Her mom watches the kid while she works part-time. I've been living in this mid-rise building for about 8 months now. The building has these tiny balconies, barely enough space for a couple of chairs and some plants, but I love mine. I've turned it into my little garden with tomatoes, herbs, and some flowers. After years of living in basement apartments, having access to sunlight and fresh air felt like a luxury. My downstairs neighbor moved in about 3 months after me. She has 2 kids, maybe around 9 and 11 years old. They're loud, but honestly, kids are kids. I work from home most days, so I hear them a lot through my floor, but I've never complained. I figured that's just apartment living. The first real interaction I had with her was when she knocked on my door asking if I had any sugar she could borrow. I gave her a cup and she promised to pay me back, but she never did. A week later, she knocked again asking for eggs. Then it was milk. After the 4th time, I started making excuses about not having anything extra. Last night around 7 p.m., I was out on my balcony watering my plants like I do every evening. It's my routine. I had my watering can in hand, tending to my basil plant, when I heard screaming from below. The kids were hanging out their balcony, waving their arms at me like I was a rescue helicopter. They yelled up asking me to wait because their mom wanted to talk to me. I called down asking what they needed, confused about what was happening. Before I could think much about it, their mother leaned out of their sliding door and smiled up at me. I'd seen her in the hallway a few times, exchanged polite nods, but we'd never really talked beyond the borrowing incidents. She apologized for bothering me and then said they were thinking I could let her kids come up to my balcony later to set off some fireworks. She explained it would be way safer than doing it at street level. I just stood there, watering can still in hand, trying to process what she'd just said. I asked her to clarify if she really wanted her kids to come up to my balcony to set off fireworks. She confirmed that yes, just for a little bit. She explained her kids got some for the holiday, and she didn't want them doing it on the street where cars are. She added that the parking lot was too crowded, and the sidewalk wasn't safe either. I pointed out that she wanted them on my balcony with explosives. She got defensive and told me not to be dramatic. She insisted they weren't explosives, just little rockets, the small ones. She said it would only take like 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most. I looked at my plants, my small wooden chair, the fabric cushion I just bought last week. I told her I didn't think that was a good idea because the balcony is really small and I have a lot of plants that could catch fire. She waved off my concern and told me to come on, that her kids are careful. Then she added that, honestly, I don't even use my balcony except for plants, so I shouldn't be selfish. She said other neighbors in the building help each other out and I should do the same. I actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a real laugh because the situation was absurd. I told her clearly that I was not letting children I don't know come into my apartment to light fireworks on my balcony. I said it was not happening. Her face changed immediately. The fake friendly smile disappeared. She said, "Wow, okay," and that she'd remember this. She announced she was going to tell the landlord that I wasn't being cooperative with neighbors. She added that we're supposed to help each other out in this building, and I was being unreasonable. She said she'd helped other people before and expected the same in return. I told her she could tell the landlord whatever she wanted, but the answer was still no. She huffed loudly and asked if I thought I was better than everyone else. She said something about how people like me ruin communities. Then she slammed her sliding door shut. The kids were still staring up at me. One of them yelled up asking why I was being mean to their mom. I went back inside, honestly a little rattled. Who asks a stranger if their kids can come set off fireworks in their home? I decided to get ahead of whatever nonsense she might try to pull, so I sent an email to our landlord right away, explaining the situation. I kept it factual and polite, just a heads up that my downstairs neighbor had made an unusual request and seemed upset when I declined. I mentioned the safety concerns and the fact that I barely know this woman or her children. The landlord responded within an hour. His email thanked me for letting him know and said what she asked was completely unreasonable and I was right to say no. He told me if she contacts him about this, he'll handle it, and wished me a good evening. He added that tenants are not obligated to provide access to their private spaces for any reason. I felt a lot better after that and figured the whole thing was over. Around 10 p.m. I heard loud banging and shouting from downstairs. It sounded like the kids were running around and she was yelling at them to settle down. Then I heard what sounded like small pops, like firecrackers going off. I looked out my window but couldn't see anything. The noise stopped after a few minutes. This morning I went out to my balcony with my coffee around 8 a.m. ready to check on my plants before starting work. I immediately noticed something weird in my basil planter. There were 2 soggy, half-burned bottle rockets sticking out of the soil. I just stared at them for a minute, trying to wrap my head around it. She actually let her kids try to launch fireworks from their balcony, and they landed in my plants. Whether they aimed for my balcony or just had terrible aim, I don't know. But the evidence was sitting right there in my basil. Some of my basil leaves were singed, and there was a small burn mark on the wooden railing. I carefully pulled the rockets out, took pictures of them and the scorch marks on the leaves, and emailed the landlord again with the photos attached. I sent an update on yesterday's situation and explained I found these in my planter this morning. I said I thought he should know and mentioned the burn mark on the railing. I also told him I heard what sounded like fireworks going off around 10 p.m. last night. His response came back in under 30 minutes asking if I was kidding. He said he was handling this today, and that this is a fire safety violation he won't tolerate. He asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint and said he'd support it. I told him yes and sent him another email with the exact time I heard the fireworks and a close-up photo of the railing damage. I don't know exactly what he said to her, but around noon I heard his voice in the hallway outside her apartment. It wasn't yelling, but it was firm and went on for a while. I caught phrases like lease violation and fire hazard and one more incident. I also heard him say something about a fine and potential eviction if this continued. She tried to argue back, saying her kids didn't mean any harm and that I was overreacting. She claimed the rockets must have blown onto my balcony by accident. The landlord wasn't having it. He told her that setting off fireworks on the property was strictly prohibited and that she'd received a copy of the building rules when she moved in. He said she was being issued a formal warning and a $200 fine for property damage. She started getting louder, saying that wasn't fair and that she couldn't afford a fine like that. He told her she should have thought about that before letting her kids launch fireworks. After he left, I heard her screaming at her kids inside the apartment. I felt a little bad for them, but not bad enough to regret reporting it. I haven't heard a peep from downstairs since. No kids yelling, no door slamming, nothing. My basil survived, thankfully. I trimmed off the burned leaves and it's already growing back. I also had to sand down the burn mark on my railing and repaint it, which took a few hours yesterday. I sent the landlord a photo of the repair work and he said he'd deduct the $200 fine from her deposit to cover my time and materials. I also installed a small camera on my balcony pointing downward just in case she decides to get creative again. The camera sends alerts to my phone whenever it detects motion. 2 days after the landlord's visit, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from her, handwritten and barely legible. It said I had no right to get her in trouble and that her kids were just trying to have fun. She said I ruined their holiday and that I should be ashamed of myself. She signed it with just her apartment number. I took a photo of the note and forwarded it to the landlord. He responded immediately saying this was harassment and he'd be adding it to her file. He said if she contacted me again in any way, he wanted to know right away. The landlord sent me one final email this evening saying she's on thin ice. He told me to document anything else that happens and reassured me that I did nothing wrong. He also mentioned that if there's one more incident, he'll begin the eviction process. I'm just glad I trusted my gut and said no in the first place. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.